Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of November the 16th and 17th, 2024. So this weekend, we have an opposition aspect between the Sun in Scorpio and Uranus in Taurus. And I do want to consider what this opposition aspect might mean in terms of the world, in terms of what it might mean if you have it in your chart, and also I want to look at a few events where the Sun and Uranus were in opposition. But before I take a detailed look at this aspect, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for this weekend. Usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to indicate this by liking it. And if you are not subscribed, I would be really happy if you were to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything, but apparently it does make a big difference to the channel. Anyway, let's look at what is happening this weekend. So here is the horoscope for this weekend. Now, top right, that is a picture of Uranus. It's not the moon, that is the planet Uranus, and the symbols of the Sun and Uranus, the opposition symbol as well. So yes, the weekend is arguably dominated by this aspect between the Sun and Uranus. So in terms of what's happening this weekend, so this chart just shows the middle of a weekend, midnight, Sunday, November the 17th, and set for New York. And you can see that at midnight, the moon is in Gemini. So the moon actually goes into Gemini at 7:09 a.m. London time on Saturday morning. So really, for most of the weekend, in fact, for some of us, all of the weekend, the moon is going to be in Gemini. So yeah, so 7:09 Saturday morning London time. So basically, if you're in Europe or Africa, Saturday morning, moon goes into Gemini. If you're in the Americas, very early in the morning, it might even sort of go into Gemini late on Friday if you're in California or Hawaii or Alaska, for example. Now, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon will go into Gemini a bit later on Saturday. So sort of Saturday, I don't know, afternoon, early evening perhaps. But I think we get the overall picture that for this weekend, if we want to make a broad generalization, the moon is in Gemini. So moon in Gemini has been in Taurus. So that means that we have a sort of a transition from an earth sign to an air sign. So with the moon moving into an air sign, that suggests more communication, more thought. Your moon in Gemini can be quite good at talking, and in fact, one can talk to avoid the important issues. So if there's something you want to avoid, just talk. Just keep talking until the problem goes away. I mean, that can be an approach with moon in Gemini, because it's interesting, because with the moon in Gemini, you have a fairly emotional planet, the moon, but in Gemini, which is more a cerebral sign connected with communication. So with the moon in Gemini, perhaps the impulse to communicate, even the impulse to think, is fairly emotional, and that might mean that we just talk just as a way of defending ourselves almost. So that can be how Moon in Gemini talks. How Moon in Gemini works. Now, the Moon in Gemini on Saturday, we have the moon as it moves into Gemini. It makes a sextile to Mars. So Moon sextile Mars, Moon in Gemini, sextile Mars in Leo. I mean, that in general is quite a nice aspect. It allows us to be verbally powerful, but it's a sextile. It's not a crazy aspect, not an angry aspect. It's not like Moon square Mars. Moon sextile Mars allows us to perhaps think about how we want to assert ourselves, and we perhaps use a little bit of talent, because talent can be a part of what the sextile means. The sextile is an aspect. It's about sixness, because the sextile is a six of the circle. So 6 is 2 times 3. So you have the oppositionness of a 2, the sort of attention of the number 2, and the ease of the number 3 combined in a sextile. So it's not totally easy, like Moon trine Mars, for example, but it's not really stressful like Moon opposition Mars. So it's Moon sextile Mars. By using a bit of thought and a bit of talent, and using a little bit of effort, we can find a way of asserting ourselves. Now, I'll leave this Sun opposition Uranus to one side for a moment, but the Moon on Sunday, the Moon makes it's as Saturday moves to Sunday, it's sort of making a square to Saturn, and then it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So Moon square Saturn, Moon conjunct Jupiter. That's kind of different, isn't it? I mean, Moon square Saturn gives us the idea of difficulty, something being held back, repressed. We can't talk about something. We'd like to talk about something, but we can't. But then it moves on to a conjunction with Jupiter. So conjunction with Jupiter is a nice aspect. Things flow. It's actually quite a lucky aspect. Okay, it's not as lucky as it would be, say, if you had Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer or in maybe Sagittarius. But, I suppose, Jupiter is in its detriment, and it's retrograde. But still, Moon conjunct Jupiter represents perhaps an antidote to that Moon square Saturn that allows us to perhaps be sort of more sort of positive and optimistic, and we may have a certain amount of luck. But talking about talking, the Moon makes an opposition on Sunday. The Moon does make an opposition to Mercury before it makes the conjunction to Jupiter. In fact, we've got a Mercury-Jupiter opposition starting to form. Now, that Mercury-Jupiter opposition is probably going to happen, I think that happens on Monday. And the reason it happens on Monday is because Mercury is now starting to slow down. It's going to go retrograde soon. When does Mercury go retrograde? I should have that information immediately at my fingertips. But Mercury goes retrograde on November the 26th. So that's why, Mercury is slowing down. And so Mercury right now is very close to that opposition of Jupiter, and the Moon is making that a conjunction to Jupiter. So Sunday, that might indicate a lot of talking. Moon making the opposition to Mercury, conjunction to Jupiter. There are a lot of things to say. Also, Mars is making a semi-square to Jupiter on Sunday as well. So a lot of aspects involving Jupiter. And Mars semi-square Jupiter, I would not regard that as being a good thing. It's somewhat violent, I would have said. And, when you think about the planet Uranus, what did people do when they didn't have Uranus? Uranus was discovered at the end of the 18th century. So does that mean when you had no Uranus, you couldn't you couldn't see the explosive potential of particular events. Or maybe you just looked at the chart in a different way. You made the most of what you had at your fingertips. And so Mars square Jupiter may have a feeling of explosiveness. It may be a bit like Uranus. It can be about violence. It can be about the overuse of power, just taking things too far. And so Mars square Jupiter, Mars semi-square Jupiter, I don't think that's a fortunate aspect. Mars-Jupiter aspects are not necessarily fortunate. I think it was CEO Carter, the British astrologer, who wrote a load of books on things like aspects, and he wrote about Mars. I think he was writing about Mars opposition Jupiter, and CEO Carter wrote that this is really the worst aspect in the book, and I think you can understand why, because there's no control to the violent potential of Mars. And so here we have Mars semi-square Jupiter. Okay, it's not as difficult as Mars opposition Jupiter, but I think it could still be a problem. Now, as far as what I regard as being the main aspect of the day, it is Sun opposition Uranus. So Sun opposition Uranus, as we will soon see, is the same as Earth conjunct Uranus, if you put the Sun at the centre of the solar system, where it should be. So Sun opposition Uranus, it's kind of tied in with the full moon. We had on Friday, we had a full moon, which was conjunct Uranus. Now we've got the Sun opposition Uranus. And yeah, it is quite violent. It may be about people just refusing to compromise. I mean, the Sun and Uranus are in fixed signs. Where is the compromise of a Sun opposition Uranus? There isn't one. And I think that the Sun opposition Uranus is not about bending, being flexible. It's about things just exploding. It's it's like that Langston Hughes poem about the raisin in the sun. What happens if you have a dream deferred, something you want to happen and it doesn't get happen? What happens to this raisin? Does it just rot away in the sun, or maybe does it explode? And that's perhaps a possibility, that if you leave something for long enough, and you don't do anything about it, you should do something about it, but you don't do something about it, and then it explodes, because no one's prepared to compromise, no one's prepared to do anything. So do think about that. If there's something that needs to be released, maybe it should be released, because the longer you leave it, the higher the pressure goes. So that's the picture over the weekend, and I now quickly just want to, for a point of comparison, compare that with Sydney, Australia. So that's noon, New York, and you've got the moon at 13 Gemini. From a perspective of Sydney, Australia. So even in Sydney, Australia, at midnight on Sunday, the moon is still at 3 Gemini. So that is a reminder that certainly Sunday, wherever you are, the moon is in Gemini. On Saturday, if you are in Australia and New Zealand, for much of the day, the moon will be in late Taurus. And so moon in late Taurus, perhaps making the conjunction to Uranus. But the Sun is opposition Uranus anyway, so I'm not convinced there's going to be a huge difference between say, Australia and New York, though that Moon-Jupiter conjunction that I was talking about, perhaps that's going to be sort of more of a feature of, very much the end of the day, perhaps into Monday if you're in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. But I don't think there's a huge difference between the two, even though the time zones are very different. Now I want to consider the heliocentric picture. And when we look at the heliocentric picture, we just have to remember that we're just going to see something in a different way. So we know that geocentrically, the Sun is opposition Uranus, because the Earth is in the middle. So from the Earth's perspective, the Sun and Uranus seem to be opposition each other. But you see, if we put things from a Sun's perspective, you see there's the Sun, then you see there would kind of be the Earth, and there would be Uranus. And so from the Sun's perspective, we would of course see an Earth-Uranus conjunction. And so if we set up the heliocentric chart, we will see an exact Earth-Uranus conjunction. So that's just a different way of looking at the Sun-Uranus opposition. And I think it kind of looks better that way. It looks more descriptive. I mean, I don't know what you think, but seeing it as an Earth-Uranus conjunction rather than a Sun-Uranus opposition perhaps gives us an idea of the drama of the event. It's like the Earth is being really impacted by Uranus because it is conjunct it. And so this aspect, is dramatic. And I mean, I'm not saying it will be dramatic. I mean, in terms of the news, I mean, it's kind of a little bit difficult to know for sure where that Earth-Uranus conjunction is going to manifest. And it is actually picked up by Venus in terms of a sort of very minor aspect. So if we take the 15 degree series of aspects, then there is a micro aspect between Venus, Earth, and Uranus. You would perhaps be able to see that on a what would that be? That would be I probably be able to see that, I think, on an opposition on a 30-degree dial. Let me just show you what I mean. I'm just going to look at a 30-degree dial here. I don't think I've ever done a 30-degree dial on a heliocentric chart before, but let me just see what happens. So there is a 30-degree. That's a 90-degree dial, and let's change it into a 30-degree dial. I'll just show you what I mean, I hope. So there, you see what I mean. There is the Earth and Uranus, and it is right opposition Venus, and that shows that at this sort of micro level, the Earth and Uranus from a heliocentric perspective are tied in with Venus. And so Venus is maybe acting as a bit of a trigger there from a heliocentric view. And I suppose you might notice that it's sort of on the Saturn-Pluto midpoint. And I just think that this sort of emphasizes perhaps the drama of this Sun-Uranus opposition, or indeed this Earth-Uranus conjunction. But I'll be talking about the Earth-Uranus conjunction at the end of this Sun-Uranus opposition at the end of this video. Anyway, let me now look at the astrology for the 12 signs for the weekend. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of November the 16th and 17th, 2024. Aries, I think that you at the moment have actually a lot to say for yourself. There are things you want to communicate, and as far as you're concerned, it's just really important that people listen. And so perhaps, Aries, you should be thinking about, what have you been holding back? Maybe you've been noticing things, and noticing lots of things, and it may feel that other people just haven't been aware of them, or maybe they've been in sort of blissful ignorance. But now it's perhaps time to, tell people what's on your mind. And, once you start talking, it's actually going to be very difficult to stop. I don't think you're going to want to stop. because there are a lot of observations to make, and at the same time, I think you're going to enjoy the actual process of talking, of communicating. Okay, it might be better, you could say, to actually do something. I mean, at Aries, you can be quite impatient with too much talking. But if the talking has a purpose, then as far as you're concerned, that's fine. And if it's making things happen, if it's changing people's minds, so much the better. And, the moon on Saturday is making a sextile to Mars. Mars is your ruler. Mars is currently very strong because the Mars is in mutual reception with the Sun by sign. Mars and Leo and the Sun in Scorpio are in each other's sign. That's why there's a mutual reception. And moon sextile Mars, you can actually concentrate on the things that matter, and I think that people will listen. Also, you don't have to feel that you are constrained. I mean, Aries as a sign really does enjoy its freedom, and it also enjoys its geographic freedom. You don't want to be tied to one place. If you stay in one place, it can get boring. And so moving from place to place over the weekend, might be a good idea. Okay, you don't want to move too much over the weekend. I mean, if you're in a constant movement, well, of course you'll get nothing done. But maybe you want, as you consider the weekend, you might want to look at the various foci of your activity. And so perhaps you might feel you could be useful here and there and somewhere else in 2 or 3 places. So make sure that you don't restrict yourself. I mean, okay, you could stay in one place if you wanted to, but I don't think that would be necessarily a good idea. Now, the moon is very communicative for you right now. That is true, and it's really encouraging you, because the moon is in Gemini. It's really encouraging you to be open and upfront. But the moon does make a square to Saturn, and that moon square Saturn may indicate that there may be a time over the weekend where you're trying to make something happen, and suddenly you hit a little bit of a block. It may be that you suddenly realize that there are lots of things you want to reveal, but not everything. And maybe you're worrying that you might be revealing too much. That is a possibility. Or there just could be hidden resistance. Perhaps in certain situations there's a sense that you are too much. Perhaps people can't handle you, and there is resistance. But if you do find there is resistance over the weekend, you feel that you're not making progress, that maybe someone's being difficult. I mean, it could be you being difficult, as I've suggested. It might be some psychological hold-up, maybe on your part. But do be persistent. Try different ways of working around the obstacle, because then the moon, it makes that square to Saturn, then it starts to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and that conjunction to Jupiter really allows everything to flow. It really allows you to tell the world who you are. Okay, you could reveal too much. I think that is possible, but I think it's a weekend where it's probably better to reveal too much than to reveal too little. So, make sure that you take advantage of the weekend. I mean, I think that is the focus. It's about you communicating, telling people what you think, and I think having a high level of honesty. And really, as an Aries, that's the way you like it. Taurus, the main aspect this weekend, I think it's the main aspect, I think it's the most important aspect, is an opposition between the Sun and Uranus. So Uranus is in Taurus. It's been in Taurus for a long time, and the Sun is in late Scorpio. And so Uranus in your sign, opposition to the Sun, there's an opposition from the Sun, and it's quite a dramatic aspect. It's also quite unpredictable. And this aspect may say something about you and maybe how you are different. You are different, and that's good that you're different. And with Uranus moving through Taurus for all these years, I'm hopeful that you have become very aware of what makes you different, of what makes you unique, and perhaps also of the things that are worth holding on to. I know that stubbornness is not always a good trait, but there are some things that you should be stubborn about, and perhaps you're now realizing what these things are, and so you are holding firm. But there might be pressure, perhaps represented by Sun opposition Uranus, to perhaps compromise a little, to let go a bit. And also you may be seeing some pressure from perhaps other people. You're being told to do one thing, you want to do something else, and this is not a situation that you're entirely comfortable about. And as a result, you might respond in a perhaps angry or at least willful way. And so when dealing with other people with the Sun opposition Uranus, be careful. There may be genuine misunderstandings which have been building up for the last couple of days. I mean, remember, on Friday we had a full moon. And that full moon, we had the moon in Taurus, Sun in Scorpio. Now we've got the Sun has moved on a little, and it's making the opposition to Uranus. So you can see how you are different. And the question is, how do you negotiate those differences? And that's particularly a problem if there's an expectation. If someone is expecting you to do something, or even to be someone, and that's not something you want to do, then I suppose there could be trouble. So think very carefully about how you handle relationships over the course of a weekend, and maybe it's a good idea to decide what kind of approach you're going to have. If you're going to want to stick to your guns, then be very clear about it right away. Don't sort of fob people off, or try to avoid a conflict, try to tell someone something nice just to make them go away. I think you need to be clear. And I think by being clear at the beginning of a weekend about who you are, what you want, what you don't want, that might be the best way of managing this Sun opposition Uranus. Now, in a constructive way, I think the Sun opposition Uranus can remind you of what makes you different, what makes you unique, and what makes you special. So do cultivate your individuality, and if other people can't handle it, well, is that anything that you should really be worrying about? Now, on a more mundane note, the moon is moving into Gemini, and with the moon moving into Gemini, there may be issues relating to money. It could be that you're thinking about money, and perhaps you're working out how money should be used, how money should not be used, and you're aware of perhaps what is holding you back financially, but also where the financial opportunities lie. And that is because the moon in Gemini. It makes a square to Saturn, and then it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So the square to Saturn can be about financial setbacks or financial worries and concerns, then the moon conjunct Jupiter can be about some kind of resolution. Though the moon does make an opposition to Mercury and a conjunction to Jupiter on Sunday, and that could be a little bit excessive in a financial sense. So there is some possibility that you respond to a financial setback or perhaps a disappointment or a realization by actually spending more money, and that's not what you should be doing. So perhaps on Sunday, be a little careful about expenditure, because of course nowadays, Sunday doesn't make any difference. The internet's open 24/7, isn't it? So there's always opportunities for spending money. And so just be sort of watchful on Sunday with moon conjunct Jupiter, moon opposition Mercury. Maybe there are going to be demands for money on Sunday, or pressure to give someone money. But the Sun is opposition Uranus. I think with that Sun opposition Uranus, you should be able to look after yourself and look after your own interests if you want to be. And and again, don't be afraid of upsetting someone. Sometimes people have to be upset, perhaps because you have to say no, and that means living with a certain amount of tension. It's nice when everything is easy, and I think that very often this human desire for everything to be easy perhaps forces humans to make compromises, encourages them to think, well, it's better to make everyone happy than to live in this state of tension. But perhaps for some Taurians, it might be a good idea to live in a little bit of a state of tension. If Sun is opposition Uranus, that is a tense aspect. It doesn't matter what you do. I think you're going to still feel a certain tension, a sense that you and other people are not necessarily on the same wavelength. So you can't just make it go away by saying yes to everything. And of course, saying yes to everything would, of course, weaken you. And I think that perhaps you just have to accept that there may at times be a little bit of discomfort. It's passing discomfort. Don't worry, this is a short-term reading just for the weekend. And I think that if you hold firm, by the beginning of next week, by Monday, I think you'll realize that what you did was absolutely right. Gemini, moon moving into your sign. I think that for most Geminis, that's going to be very welcome. You've had the moon moving through Taurus, and the moon moving through Taurus, it had its ups and downs, but you perhaps felt that you couldn't quite be yourself. You had to maybe hold something back. You just weren't ready to do whatever you felt you wanted to do. But now that the moon has entered Gemini, I think that you're feeling sort of more optimistic, and the idea that things can happen. Of course, I understand that if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might not enter Gemini until late on Saturday. But, I wouldn't worry about that. I suppose if you're in Australia or New Zealand, perhaps for most of Saturday, it might be a time still for thought, contemplation, working out what needs to be done, not taking the initiative, perhaps enjoying your own company. But at a certain stage, the moon will move into Gemini. And I think as a global generalization for the whole weekend, the moon is in Gemini. And so Gemini, as the moon moves into your sign, you're feeling that you are able to get things moving, and you're feeling sort of more positive about your prospects, and you perhaps have a sense that if you think something and you're able to talk about something, you can actually perhaps make it happen. So there is perhaps a question of how you do that, and I shouldn't underemphasize your overall sense of power. I think I actually talked about the sense of power that you have when I was looking at your horoscope for Friday, I think. And so you do have a sense of who you are and what you can do. And it doesn't matter where you are, even if it's Saturday morning in Australia, even if the moon is still in Taurus for you, still you have that sense of power and you have a sense of what you can actually do. So Geminis, really, it's important that you're able to tune into yourself as a powerful person who can make things happen. And so when you think, it's not just idle fantasy. I mean, I suppose it could be idle fantasy, but it needn't be idle fantasy. Your thoughts can be turned into reality. Okay, not in all cases. I suppose it depends how far your fantasies go. But you're helped, I think, by the fact that the moon in Gemini is, first, as it moves into Gemini, it makes a sextile to Mars. And moon sextile Mars is very much about articulating who you are, what you want to be, making people really understand what you want. And you can do this with a certain amount of vigor. And then the moon, having made that sextile to Mars, it actually starts making a square to Saturn. Now, the moon square Saturn might sound a little bit grim, but I would have said it could be quite useful. I mean, other signs may not find the moon square Saturn particularly useful, but I think you will find it useful. I think it allows you to focus. It allows you to combine your mind with the material world, realizing that if you want something to happen, you will have to put in the effort, and you're prepared to put in the effort. And that moon square Saturn would be particularly useful if over the weekend you're doing something which is connected with, say, your ambitions, or if you're working over the weekend, or if you have a business, or you're trying to promote your business or over the weekend, or find new clients, whatever. So if you're engaged in anything anything relating to ambition, to how you're trying to promote yourself, I think with that moon square Saturn is going to be very useful. It will provide you with real focus, and it may, I suppose, be about preparation as well. Moon square Saturn allows you to think about what needs to be done, and I think that you're going to be able to do that very effectively. And the moon, having made a square to Saturn, it makes an opposition to Mercury, and it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. That moon conjunct Jupiter is certainly really good. It's really nice to have a moon Jupiter conjunction in your sign on Sunday, and that really allows you to sort of propel yourself forward. It gives you a vision. It makes you optimistic, and certainly through the power of that optimism, I do think that you can make things happen. Yet the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and that opposition to Mercury is important, because we have Mercury moving towards an opposition of Jupiter. Now that Mercury-Jupiter opposition, I think it's more of a feature of Monday. Let me just check when that moon opposition Mercury actually falls. So moon opposition Mercury Mercury opposition Jupiter. Yeah, Mercury opposition Jupiter is on Monday, but you're still going to feel it over the weekend. And so Mercury opposition Jupiter may make you think that certain people may be holding you back. That's one way of looking at it. Or it just could be that something you do or something someone else does is not entirely useful in terms of a relationship. because Mercury represents you. Jupiter may actually represent someone else, a partner, someone you have to have a lot to do with, and it just is a certain difference in the way you approach things. And if you take things too far and without considering the way another person feels, you don't consider their opinion, that could be unfortunate. So it is a good weekend. I think it could be a very good weekend. But with that Mercury opposition Jupiter, and in fact the Moon making that conjunction to Jupiter, making an opposition to Mercury, I think that certain relationships could be too much of a good thing. You might take them too far, or they might go in a direction that you weren't expecting, or someone might be excessive, or someone might talk too much. One word too much can spoil everything. You know how it is. I mean, I think this can be a particular sort of Gemini issue, that you're talking about something and you're happy-go-lucky and you're saying what's on your mind and everything's going fine, and then you say one word too many. You say something which perhaps you accidentally reveal your true feelings, your true motivations, and immediately something changes. The atmosphere changes. The other person gets offended, and it just happens. So it is actually possible to say too much this weekend, and it's just that last word, the last word that spoils everything. So I suppose don't say too much. I mean, by all means, be open and honest, but just remember that it is possible to go too far. Cancer, it's a weekend where I think in a sense you probably are going to want to look after yourself. So on Friday we had a full moon, and Cancerians tend to be quite sensitive to the full moon, and perhaps over the weekend you kind of want to recover from the full moon. You want to sort of take it all in, sort of understand what it's all about. Now, that might not be how you actually perceive it. You may not be thinking in terms of full moons, but it just may still feel that over the weekend you're going to, enjoy your own company. You're going to appreciate your own company. And I don't think, at least in the first instance, that you're going to really want to do too much. And you're very much, I think, going to want to be in control. And I think that's okay. And so as far as the main aspects that we have, well, we do have a Sun opposition Uranus. Sun opposition Uranus, it's more of a continuation of the full moon. So the full moon had its own drama. Then the Sun in Scorpio opposition Uranus in Taurus. That does again weigh on you. It just makes you think that it's a difficult world in which we live, and why do you want to expose yourself to all of its stresses and strains if you actually don't have to? But I suppose on the plus side, that Sun opposition Uranus could be creatively challenging. You may be encouraged with that Sun opposition Uranus to do something better. And if you're doing anything which values creativity and individualism, then I think that Sun opposition Uranus could be useful. And you can perhaps observe the society in which you're living at a distance, and at the same time take some lessons from it, and it may actually inform your creativity. And so perhaps in terms of what you're doing, it can be a reflection of the society in which you're living. And I suppose that would be particularly important if you're a Cancerian artist or writer. But even if you don't regard yourself as an artist or a writer, your creative output should be pretty good over the weekend, however you perceive creativity. And I think, in many cases, the more time you have on your own, I think the better. And I suppose we can't avoid the fact that the moon is making a square to Saturn. So moon square Saturn, just may indicate a certain amount of uneasiness with certain people. I mean, it's a short-lived aspect, the moon square Saturn, but there may be times where you just feel that certain people are difficult, they're heavy, maybe a little bit judgmental. And the last thing you want this weekend is to be judged. But the moon square Saturn is just one of the lunar aspects going on over the weekend. We do have a build-up towards a sort of a moon conjunct Jupiter. Moon conjunct Jupiter is a great aspect, and it is fortunate, and it allows you to tune into who you are, what you can do, and the opportunities that are available, not just now, but in the near future. So use that moon Jupiter conjunction, and don't feel that it's public property. It's your moon Jupiter conjunction. It's something that you can work through, and perhaps with that moon Jupiter conjunction, you can perhaps allow yourself to have a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of fantasy with that moon Jupiter. A fantasy, can be useful. It can allow you to consider what might be possible if you were left in peace, if you didn't have to deal with outside demands. And in that sense, you might sort of get a vision of what the future could be like if everything went your way, if you weren't told what to do, if you didn't have to fit in with other people's views, maybe the world's views, and if you could just be a free spirit. And I think you can be a free spirit. I think that's, to a great extent, what this weekend should be about. And so it is perhaps a weekend where it's okay to be selfish. You put yourself first. It doesn't mean other people have to suffer or you have to reject anyone, but you just have to make sure you put your own interests first, and in that way you'll be allowing the planets to work in your favour. Leo. The Sun is opposition Uranus, and that certainly matters. I mean, the Sun is your ruler, it's opposition Uranus, so that indicates that there could be some drama. And so it's perhaps not a weekend where you should just assume that everything is going to just happen according to a particular plan or a particular scheme. The weekend will just unfold in its own way. And I think that it's important that you're ready and accept that things might not go to plan, and also work out how you're going to deal with outside pressure. You might feel that you want everything to move in a particular way, that you've got everything sorted out, that everything's going to be fine, but then just suddenly something happens. Someone wants you to do something. They expect you to do something. And your first instinct might be to say no, to sort of dig your heels in, but that's not something you can do. It's a weekend where you have to look after yourself, but you can't be unreasonable. And if there are requests, then I think it would be unwise to turn those requests down, at least not turn them down flat. You have to really listen to what people want, and it may be that you have to meet them halfway. Or it may represent a challenge. So the challenge might be to actually accept that you are wanted somewhere else, that you have to think about things in a new way, that you can't just ignore all the drama going on around you. You just have to an extent, make it a part of your life. And it's not perhaps what you wanted, but it's probably the way forward. And also, we do have the moon moving through Gemini. And so with the moon moving through Gemini, I think that it is important that you do look around you. You consider the impact that other people have on you. Other people as a group, as a crowd. I'm not necessarily talking about one-to-one relationships here, but just consider your social milieu, and a bit of socializing over the weekend wouldn't do you any harm, I don't think. I mean, yeah, there is a conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. It's a very nice conjunction between the moon and Jupiter. So when you're with people, with the right people, you're going to feel happy and content, and but also I think you're going to also feel appreciated. And I should also point out that your verbal skills over the weekend are actually going to be pretty good. The moon is in Gemini. It's making a sextile to Mars. Mars is in mutual reception to the Sun. So with the moon making a sextile to Mars, that means that once you really start to be with people, once you start engaging with other people, things really start to move. And you can get, a lot of favourable attention. And people, I think, are going to really like what you have to say. And in fact, you'll be very good at motivating people. You can motivate people to do things with the force of your own words. Once the words start flowing, you'll start to realize that you are actually having an impact, that people are listening to you, that you are able to stir things up, but I think in quite a pleasant way. Okay, pleasant, certainly useful. So the force of your words should certainly not be underestimated. So it's perhaps a weekend where you do need to be challenged. I think you start the weekend maybe thinking that you want to do things your way, that your way is best, that you don't necessarily need anyone. But if you actually look at what's happening around you, you'll start to realize that you can get involved, and maybe you need to be pushed to begin with. That's Sun opposition Uranus. As the Sun opposition Uranus, as the Sun moves towards the opposition of Uranus, that is perhaps about external pressure, reminding you that you are not an island, and once you come off your island, or however you want to look at it, come down from your mountaintop, once you do that and you start to interact, I think that you will be pleasantly surprised. Virgo, you, in a way, are quite high profile this weekend. You do feel that it's a time that everyone needs to see you, everyone needs to know you, they would need to know what you're about, and you've got things that you want to do, and you want to perhaps make things happen. And there is a certain sense of actual optimism about it. You may think that many different things are possible, and it's to do with the moon moving into Gemini. From a Virgo perspective, I think you quite like the moon being in Gemini. I mean, it helps that the moon is ruled by Mercury, and so is Virgo. So there's a kind of sympathy between Gemini and Virgo. I mean, they are different signs in a way. Gemini is an air sign, Virgo is an earth sign, but because both signs are ruled by Mercury, there is a sympathy there. And I think that with the moon moving into Gemini, you can start seeing things in a different way, and you can start becoming perhaps aware of new possibilities. And also you can sort of tune into, who you are and what you can do and what your potential is. And moon moving into Gemini is especially useful if you're planning on having a constructive and focused weekend where you feel that you've got goals to achieve, whether they be private goals or public goals. If you've got something that needs to be achieved over the weekend with the moon moving into Gemini, I really do think that you can achieve it, and I think you can get noticed and certainly appreciated. And the moon in Gemini, it makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So Moon-Jupiter conjunction it's a very fortunate aspect. So you will have luck on your side. But I suppose if you want to make the most of that luck, you have to be a little bit open-minded, and there may be a certain sense of challenge because, Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Sagittarius. And sort of Mercury in Sagittarius, from a Virgo view, it kind of wants to stay where it is. Mercury in Sagittarius, for you, not for other people, but for you, Mercury in Sagittarius is at the lowest point of the chart, Mercury in Sagittarius. And so part of you just doesn't want to engage. You just feel that it's just a little bit too much. But there's another part that really wants to engage, that wants to just make things happen. And there's a certain sense of asking yourself, how far do you want to go? And you may be a little bit afraid that there's just too much pressure, and you maybe want to at times retreat into yourself. But I don't think that's the right approach. You have to look after yourself, and you have to make sure that you are secure, but you don't want to take things too far. And Mercury is moving towards an opposition of Jupiter, and yes, I think that could be challenging. But remember that Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. Mercury is in Jupiter's sign, Jupiter is in Mercury's sign. So if you are being challenged, it's done for your interest, in your interests. And so if it's suggested that you do something that you don't really want to do, just do it, I would have said. I mean, after a little bit of thought, you don't want to do something that is completely alien to your nature. But if you trust your feelings, you'll know where you should be. And so, yes, it's a challenge, but I think it's a challenge that you can certainly manage. And I actually think it can be quite a successful weekend. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, on Monday, we have an opposition between the Mercury-Jupiter are exactly opposition, but you're feeling it over the weekend as well. And this Mercury-Jupiter opposition perhaps represents you and another person, you being represented by Mercury, perhaps the other person represented by Jupiter. And it's about you and someone else who have really quite different priorities, perhaps different backgrounds as well. And at first sight, it just may seem that you and this other person have nothing in common. But Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception. So there is the ability to understand one another and also to benefit from one another. So perhaps there are things you don't have that someone else does have, or things you've got and they haven't got. And there's perhaps a scope for some kind of exchange. I mean, literally, mutual reception, mutual exchange, that's what can happen. So it can be a situation where everyone benefits, not a situation where, you might think at first sight that if you lose, someone else benefits. You don't want to give something away. But in fact, this is a situation where everyone can benefit. And I'm reminded of, in the I Ching, there's this sort of hexagram. There are these two hexagrams, increase and decrease. Decrease is hexagram 41 and increase is hexagram 42. And I haven't thrown any I Ching coins for Virgo, obviously, but it's perhaps good to think about that. And the concept of increase and decrease is very often about, if you want something, you perhaps have to give something up. So you make yourself more by being less. And so this may relate to this Mercury-Jupiter opposition. If you want something, you have to give something away. And what you give away is absolutely trivial in terms of what you get back. And that's maybe how you should see the various relationships in your life. And relationships, I'm not just talking about romance, it could just be a passing encounter, whatever it is, that this weekend and into Monday and in fact probably into the beginning of next week, you really can benefit from certain people, and it's mutual benefit. It's not about one person losing and one person gaining. So try to be constructive and optimistic, and just see how the unfolding situation can benefit you, because there are plenty of ways in which you can benefit. I think you can even benefit from chaos and uncertainty. So overall, Virgo, I think it looks good. Libra, I think that you can afford to be more expansive, more optimistic. I think that, recently, over the last couple of days, you may have felt that things were a little bit serious. Maybe it had something to do with the full moon. You had to tread carefully. Things could go wrong. At least that's how it felt. But now, this weekend, I think you can be more relaxed. And I think that the reason for that is that the moon is changing sign. The moon is moving out of Taurus into Gemini. And of course, Gemini is a sign that, you have a natural sympathy with, because it's an air sign. It's at a level that you can understand. And so maybe some of your introspections will become less intense, and you'll be able to sort of look at the opportunities that are becoming available to you. And at the same time, I think that you're going to be more curious, and curiosity does matter. If you see something you don't fully understand, I think you're going to want to know more about it. And with curiosity also comes a certain open-mindedness. It has been a time where a lot of people have been quite close-minded, regardless of their sign, and they just found it sort of difficult to look beyond their little box, or they've sort of put themselves in some kind of fortress, and they refuse to consider any other alternatives. But with the moon in Gemini, now we can start seeing the other side of the coin, and you can start seeing the other side of the coin. And perhaps, Libra, things that were really essential to you very recently, almost a matter of life and death, it's not quite such a big deal anymore. And you can perhaps understand people's perspective in a way that you hadn't been able to before. And, outside perspectives do matter. You haven't got all the answers. You haven't got all the answers. And so getting an alternative view from someone, even if it's a radically different view, just could be a really good thing, and it could just help sort of move you on. But still, Virgo, I think that you do kind of regard the world as being a little bit heavy. There is a certain sense that things are still somewhat stuck, that there are things sort of holding you back, and it's like the cobwebs, just cobwebs of the past, maybe, and you're taking these cobwebs too seriously. But as I said at the beginning of this piece, this is not a time for getting caught up in the past. It's perhaps a time for sort of breaking free, but in quite a gentle way. I mean, I know that there's an opposition between the Sun and Uranus this weekend, but I mean, I know that that can be quite a difficult, violent opposition, but I don't think that that Sun opposition Uranus is going to directly impact you. I mean, it needn't. So it's just important not to take things too seriously and just to see what is available, what opportunities there are, and because there are plenty of opportunities. And we do have a conjunction between Moon and Jupiter. Moon and Jupiter is, it's a very nice conjunction, and it's a nice conjunction for you. So if you consider a possibility, then it may be able to happen, and perhaps with another person's help, because the moon just doesn't just make a conjunction to Jupiter, because at the beginning of a weekend, when the moon moves into Gemini, it actually makes a sextile to Mars, and that sextile to Mars may represent another person. It may be talking about a relationship. So in fact, Saturday, if possible, maybe you should spend some time on relationships, spending your time with another person, particularly if that person is strong but sort of honest and good-natured. You need perhaps a little bit of dynamism, and that moon sextile Mars can perhaps give you the dynamism that maybe you've actually been looking for. So Saturday could be sort of quite a constructive day as that moon sextile Mars comes into play, and then the moon does make a square to Saturn, and the moon square Saturn may represent a tension between what you would like to happen in the future and what you feel obliged to do. And you may feel that somehow you can't get everything you want because you've got an obligation. It's an obligation that you just don't want to deal with, but you have to keep thinking about it. And so, like it or not, you are having to deal with it. And what probably that moon square Saturn means is it's just something very small that you've maybe been putting off. You don't want to do it. You've kind of assumed it's going to take you hours and hours to finish. But actually, with that moon square Saturn, if you actually just do it, it will be over very quickly. It may take you just a few minutes. I suppose it could be a phone call. It could be just something that has to be done, I don't know, around the house or whatever. Just something to make you feel that you've faced the obligation, you've dealt with it, it's out of the way, and then you can be free. And then you can start perhaps enjoying the moon conjunct Jupiter. And moon conjunct Jupiter, is just a time which it's all about seeing what's available and not restricting yourself. And any restrictions that you might have felt essentially were from the past. So Libra, just see what's available, and perhaps we don't want the weekend to be too complicated. Yeah, it's easy. It's always easy to overcomplicate things, but the more you can find out, the more you can be enlightened. I think sort of so much the better. And that moon conjunct Jupiter can have a spiritual dimension. It can be about being aware of something which is sort of beyond yourself. I don't think in terms of spirituality, because it's in Gemini, I'm not really talking about some supernatural apparition or anything like that. The moon in Gemini is perhaps more about words, perhaps words coming into your head as if something is almost talking to you, and the words can really enhance who you are and just give you a sense of there is something bigger. And those words may actually not come from something out there, from your higher self or whatever. They may come from someone else. So someone may say something to you, and those words just make perfect sense. And they may actually be a little bit challenging, because the moon is not just making a conjunction to Jupiter, but it's also making an opposition to Mercury. And so maybe part of the challenge from a sort of a spiritual sense would be to contrast logic and ideas, logical ideas, with something which goes beyond logic. And just because something doesn't make sense, just because something is completely far-fetched, doesn't mean that it's not real. So that's it, Libra. I think it can be an expansive, optimistic weekend where the division and uncertainties of the past can be finally got rid of. Scorpio. Scorpio, there is this opposition between the Sun and Uranus this weekend. And yes, Sun is in Scorpio, Uranus is in Taurus. I think it's very likely that you're going to feel this opposition. And of course, it's across the main axis of your chart. So in a way, Scorpio, it's a sort of follow-up to the full moon. So on Friday, you had a full moon having a direct impact on your sign. Obviously you had Sun in Scorpio, opposition Moon in Taurus. So you really felt that full moon, I think. And now we've got Sun opposition Uranus, and it's Sun opposition Uranus, I think, can be actually quite a dramatic aspect, and it can really sort of stir things up. And so how we might see this is, Sun is in Scorpio. Scorpio, you could say, well, maybe that's you. However you're seeing these 12 sign forecasts, whether you're looking at it from a perspective of your ascendant or your sun sign or your moon sign, some people sort of ask, should they look at my sign readings from a perspective of the sun or the ascendant? And I always say that it's kind of up to them, but probably the ascendant is better. But I suppose I'm a bit of a sort of a traditionalist, in the sense that when I first started doing 12 sign astrology, it's just 12 sign astrology, when I was doing contract work for a cell phone company, I always thought in terms of the sun sign rather than the ascendant sign. But I suppose nowadays everyone knows their ascendant, at least they do if they know their time of birth. Anyway, so Sun in Scorpio, I think, does represent you, and Uranus in Taurus perhaps represents a challenge. There's something from the outside which is challenging you, maybe making your life difficult, and it's a challenge that you perhaps don't really want to meet. Scorpios do like to do things their way, and many Scorpios don't like surprises. And there could be something a little bit surprising about Sun opposition Uranus, having to deal with someone and you thought they were going to do one thing and they do something else and you're not particularly happy about it. So I think that, Scorpio, you perhaps need to surprise-proof the weekend. I mean, how do you do that? I suppose you can just shut everything out, just be isolated. But even when you're isolated, you can have surprises. A surprise can be a realization. You can have a realization on your own and it can change everything. But perhaps the best way to surprise-proof the weekend is to just think about all the things that could happen. Think about all the possibilities. And when you think about all the possibilities, when the surprise actually comes, you won't be surprised at all and it won't be a surprise. So that might be what you need to do over the course of the weekend. And aside from that, we do have the moon moving into Gemini, moving out of Taurus into Gemini. So when the moon was in Taurus, there may have been a fair amount of focus on other people and what people could do and couldn't do and what kind of an effect they had on you. But with the moon moving into Gemini, it is a time when you perhaps are starting to sort of appreciate your own company, and you do realize that there are some things that you need to work through on your own. You really can't get any outside help. Okay, if it's a matter of life and death, you can get outside help, but for sort of ordinary sort of day-to-day challenges, I don't think you necessarily need anyone's help, because actually I think you've got all the resources you require, and at the same time you're probably going to be quite resourceful. You'll know where to find things, and you'll know where to look things up. And so with that Moon-Jupiter conjunction, you can explore, you can ask questions, and in most cases you'll get the answers you're looking for. Now, I don't know what your plans are for the weekend, but I should point out that on Saturday the Moon is making a sextile to Mars, and that Moon sextile Mars looks, to my mind, fairly useful. Moon sextile Mars can be about, particularly Moon in Gemini sextile Mars, can be about feeling things, perhaps discovering things in a sort of quite an emotional way that can be helpful in terms of where you want to go. So if there are places you want to go to, targets you want to achieve, then the Moon in Gemini is going to help you. It's going to give you the information you need. And that information can be found in many different ways. And it can be just emotional information. You know, you just feel something, you turn it into words, and then you put those words into practice. And I should, also point out that, in fact, you do have a way with words this weekend. So you don't have to be shy, at least in a verbal sense. I know that Scorpios often don't like people that talk too much, and sometimes Scorpios can talk a lot. I mean, it's not that you. I know that Scorpio is ruled by a Scorpion, and Scorpio is supposed to be a mute sign, but still, when you get into the swing of things, when you find something that you're passionate about, you can talk a lot about it, and you can think a lot about it at the same time. So once you find something interesting, you'll be able to talk about it for ad infinitum. So don't feel that you have to be silent over the weekend, even if the Scorpio is a mute sign. There are things to say, and the things you say won't be nonsense. They'll be carefully thought out, and not too carefully thought out, but you're not going to make a fool of yourself. And so you have something to say, and you have insights that I think everyone else would really appreciate. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, we have a build-up to an opposition between Mercury and Jupiter. Now, this Mercury-Jupiter opposition takes place on Monday, but still, I think you're going to be feeling it, because we've got Mercury in Sagittarius, Mercury going very slowly through your sign. Mercury is preparing to go stationary retrograde, and so that's why Mercury stays in your sign for so long. Mercury doesn't leave Sagittarius until early January, so it's quite a long-lasting movement. Mercury moving through Sagittarius does last a long time, and so Mercury is making an opposition to Jupiter. Of course, Jupiter is your ruler, and so that is in some respects quite exciting. You feel that you're very alive, and I think that you feel that your mind is very alive with this Mercury opposition Jupiter. And you're feeling it this weekend as well, because on Sunday the moon moves into moon is in Gemini. The moon makes an opposition to Mercury. It makes a conjunction to Jupiter. So that Mercury opposition Jupiter, I do think it is a major feature of the weekend, and there is certainly, I think, a lot happening, or there can be a lot happening if you want it to happen, and you'll have lots to say. And if you're with people, many different things can happen. I mean, it could be exciting. It could be a great sense of excitement when you're with people. But at the same time, there could be differences of opinion. And, that is because Mercury is opposition Jupiter. Mercury is, ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign. Mercury very often has a connection with other people. And Jupiter is, of course, you. It's your ruler. So Mercury opposition Jupiter may represent a complete difference of opinion, a complete difference of perspective. And your immediate response to the situation might be to just, you just want to get out. This is not what you wanted. But maybe you need to look at it again, because Mercury and Jupiter are in mutual reception with each other. And so, that means that there is actually a sympathy between Mercury and Jupiter. So perhaps you need to work on that sympathy. If you find that you disagree with someone, maybe that's just a superficial impression. Maybe you haven't thought about the thing deeply enough. And if you work with the various relationships in your life, even if they are difficult, tense relationships, I think over the weekend and into early next week, I think that you can make really good progress. And you can start to see that, where there was a difference of opinion, actually there is something complementary going on, that what you have, someone else does have, and that perhaps you and other people can help each other. So that's why you shouldn't jump to conclusions about the important people in your life, even the non-important people. Maybe there are people on the fringes of your existence who you don't understand, you haven't made an effort to understand, but if you try to understand them, you might be pleasantly surprised. And don't underestimate your own power, but by the same token, don't underestimate other people's power, because the thing about the mutual reception between Mercury and Jupiter is that you're dealing with two energies which support each other, make each other stronger. So it's probably a situation where you are going to be, in general, stronger in a group, stronger in a relationship than on your own. And so, you really perhaps need to consider that possibility. The Mercury-Jupiter opposition may also have relevance to your career, if that's important to you. If you have a career or if you have a business, then that Mercury-Jupiter opposition could be important. Perhaps you may be looking at what you do, and you're looking at your ambitions and what you're trying to achieve, and in the first instance you might be thinking, well, this is going nowhere. Is it really worth the effort? Because Mercury is opposition Jupiter. But then, on reflection, you'll just see that it's just a challenge. It's just a time where there is doubt, but there's nothing wrong with a little bit of doubt. And if there's doubt, that can encourage you to make an extra effort and to perhaps to see possibilities. So it may be that an activity that you're involved with, or even a job that you're involved with, that right now you don't appreciate, may actually be great if you just had a different approach. So Sagittarius, I think that this weekend could actually be very constructive on pretty much all levels. Capricorn, it's a weekend where you probably don't want to do anything too dramatic, because you realize that things are dramatic anyway. I mean, that's the way it is. You understand what's unfolding around you, and so you perhaps take the view, why make something complicated when it's already pretty complicated? And so you might then be of the opinion that, the less said, the better. Indeed, the less done, the better. And Capricorn, you may feel also that it's a time when you need to be making sure that everything is on an even keel, because you can see that things could so easily go wrong. But I think in some respects you're being overcautious. I mean, you can see what's happening around you, what's happening in other people's lives, and you can see the worry, you can see the concern. But as far as you're concerned, I suppose this weekend, it's a good weekend for making preparations, for just making sure that everything is in order. If something is worrying you, maybe you can resolve the worry. It may turn out to be unnecessary, but it might be worth the effort in terms of giving yourself peace of mind. And the actions you take over the weekend, I really do believe, can give you peace of mind. And perhaps really that's what you should be focusing on, looking at all the things that are bothering you, all the things that may be keeping you up at night, and just dealing with them. And it's just going to make you feel a whole lot better. And it will also help give you a certain sense of perspective. And I think you'll realize that some of the things worrying you are collective problems. What's happening in your society, in your community. They're collective. You shouldn't feel that you have to take the weight of the world on your shoulders. I mean, you don't. Even if you feel that there are deadlines, you do not have to take the weight of the world on your shoulders. You're perhaps taking on a little bit too much responsibility. And so perhaps, Capricorn, you need to get some of that responsibility in perspective. You don't have to do it. You may feel obliged to do it, but you don't actually have to do it. And so I'm hoping that in a way that will just make you feel a little more relaxed, and not feeling that you have to be at the center of things all the time, because to be honest, you don't. Yet, on a sort of a positive note, Venus is still moving through Capricorn, and I think that Venus in Capricorn, it does just provide just a bit of an antidote to the whole thing. Venus in Capricorn, there is a relaxing side to Venus moving through Capricorn. And so, while Venus moves through Capricorn, it is in Capricorn until, December the 7th. So while Venus moves through Capricorn, there's always that opportunity to sort of get off, to relax, not feel that everything is hard work. And perhaps you need to think about the people in your life who can be reassuring. Not everyone is difficult and problematic. People who you feel comfortable with, and the right company over the weekend, I think can make all the difference. So that's the weekend. I don't feel I want to say much more. I mean, it can be a productive weekend, no doubt about that. You can certainly cover a lot of ground, but you mustn't feel that you have to be productive. And so, in that sense, I think this weekend you should regard it as being a weekend of choice rather than a weekend of obligation. Aquarius, we've got activity in Gemini. The moon is moving into Gemini, and the moon is making a conjunction to Jupiter in Gemini. And from an Aquarian viewpoint, I would have said that is good news. You can, I suppose, be yourself, and you can do things that you enjoy. That is important. Enjoyment does matter, and if there's something you want to do, then I would suggest that you just do it, and you don't have to explain it, and don't worry too much about, maybe you're wasting your time if you're enjoying yourself. No, you're not wasting your time. Provided it's wholesome and creative, then you can't go wrong. And of course, the best ways of enjoying yourself don't cost anything. Yet I suppose you might be concerned about cost for one reason or another, cost or money. But if something isn't costing you anything, you're not spending money on it, then really there's not much to worry about, is there? So, that is, I think, quite constructive. And I think that you also may feel that you're at the center of things. You're at the center of the wheel. And, we do live in a complicated world, where things are happening at a faster and faster pace. And, many people are somewhat traumatized by this. And perhaps you've had your own moments of concern. But I think at the moment you can place yourself, in the center of the wheel. The wheel might be moving at 1,000 miles an hour, but of course at the center it's not moving. And that's where you can put yourself. You can observe everything unfolding in your own part of the world, or your own little part of the world, where everything is tranquil. And so that perhaps allows you to observe, and also to get a certain sense of perspective. Though I suppose you may have to appreciate that, some people do seem to be a little bit freaked out still. Even the people close to you. And it's to do with the Sun opposition Uranus. I suppose we had the full moon on Friday. Now we've got the Sun opposition Uranus. And with the Sun opposition Uranus, some people are not very calm. And they feel that they're just living in a difficult, complicated world where they have no power and no agency. But it's not you. But still, other people's concerns may be dumped on your doorstep, and you might then have to sort of work out what the best approach is. If you have to calm someone down, or make an attempt to calm someone down for whatever reason, I think that you'll be quite good at it. And also, don't make assumptions about anyone. Just because someone is calm on the surface doesn't mean that they're calm deep down. And it just may be that it's just the world they're living in. They just can't fully deal with it or fully accept it, but you can accept it. And maybe, Aquarius, part of what you need to do this weekend, is to set a good example. Demonstrate that you can be calm, that whatever's happening, it's not interfering with the running of your life. But also don't be aloof from it. Don't be dismissive. You can make it clear that you understand that we're all living in a complicated world, but nonetheless, you're able to live your life, and furthermore, you're able to enjoy your life. And in fact, in terms of making the most of everything, when you're living in an unstable world, that tends to be creatively useful. You can take that instability, some of that instability, and you can make it part of who you are in a constructive way. And maybe you can describe this creativity, almost in an artistic sense. So, that perhaps reminds us that, at times, in times of turmoil, that's very often when art and culture are working at their best. When everything is the same, when everything is normal, when everything is tranquil, nothing happens. It's just boring. But there's nothing boring about you this weekend. You are an interesting person who can, at the same time, set a very good example. Pisces. Pisces, you can feel, I think, the influence of an opposition aspect between Mercury and Jupiter. And this Mercury-Jupiter opposition, it's exact on Monday, but I think you're still picking it up, especially on Sunday, because on Sunday you've got the Moon making an opposition to Mercury. Moon makes a conjunction to Jupiter, so you are feeling it. And this Mercury-Jupiter opposition is asking you perhaps to go further than you want to go. I think that, intrinsically, Pisces, at the moment, you probably want to do nothing in particular. You certainly don't want to be tied to anything. You don't want to promise anything. You don't want to really go out of your way in any area. And so that might be how you feel intrinsically. But I do think with Mercury opposition Jupiter, something is asking you to go further than you want to go, or something. It might be someone. It's almost like a request, and your first impulse might be to just turn the request down. Do you need that aggravation? But maybe you need to be sort of more understanding, and you perhaps need to understand why you're being asked to do things. It might not immediately make sense, but if you can perhaps try to work out what is happening, you may actually see that there might either be an opportunity or an obligation, or it could be both. So if you have to do something, or you're being asked to do something which you hadn't planned on, you just don't immediately reject it. Try to work out what's going on. And I think in most cases you should probably accept the invitation, or at least explore it, because it may be you're needed somewhere else. You might think you should be just looking after your own interests, but you may be needed somewhere else. And actually, if you're needed somewhere else, when you do find that you're going out of your way on someone else's behalf, you might actually end up finding that it turns out to be in your interests all along. So don't think, Pisces, that you absolutely understand your own interests, that you always can act in your own interests without having to think too much, because your own interests are quite complex at the moment, and you should always consider what other people are trying to say and are trying to communicate, because they do, I think, have something quite important to offer. Also, Pisces, at the moment, you are in a position where you are able to resolve things quickly. So if there is a problem that needs to be resolved, whether it's your problem or someone else's problem, your fast action, your fast and timely action can make a huge difference. And you might not feel that you're ready for this kind of action. It might not feel appropriate, but it's perhaps you're like one of those sort of slow-moving snakes that you see. And I don't know, I get obsessed about snakes somehow. I mean, I get all these snake videos on my YouTube feed, just lots of snake videos, and you see these snakes that these squat snakes, and they're super poisonous, and they don't seem to be doing anything, yet they have the capacity to strike at the most incredible speeds when they want to do. And so maybe you're a bit like that. You may just feel a bit sluggish, but suddenly when the moment arrives, when you see this is your time, you can strike very quickly. And of course, unlike these squat poisonous snakes, your strike is not there to kill, it's there to cure. And so you can see a situation, know what needs to be done, act very, very quickly. faster than anyone can imagine, and you can just perhaps solve it in a matter of seconds. But you have to give yourself the opportunity first. So Pisces, I think it's perhaps a weekend where you shouldn't have fixed plans, and listen to other people, listen to other people's requests, and in certain cases it may be a time to be making yourself available, because by making yourself available to another person or a group of people if needed, you might not just be able to help them, but you actually in the end might be able to help yourself. Okay, that's it. Those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and now it's time to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching, just as the kettle is going. So these are my forecasts for the weekend of November the 16th and 17th. And what I'm doing is the kettle distracted me. So let me start again. I asked the I Ching the following question. What is the weekend of November the 16th and 17th going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 47, which is oppression. So I'm afraid oppression is not a great hexagram. It does indicate that things are hard work. It's difficult to do what we feel we need to do. And it might be like we're carrying a bit of a weight on our shoulders, and yeah, it's hard work, but it does seem that we will in the end be successful. We will reach our goals again in the end, but it is going to be hard work, and we may not always get the support we feel that we deserve. Now, this hexagram oppression, it does have a moving line, and the moving line is the fourth line from the bottom. And this fourth line may indicate, perhaps, that we have the tools. We have the tools we need to achieve whatever it is we're trying to achieve. But the question is, are we actually using these tools correctly? So it may just be that we're not helping ourselves through our approach. Maybe people will take the view, well, you've got everything you need. Well, you've been given everything you need, yet you're still flailing around. And so perhaps what you need to do is look at what you've got and just have another look. Maybe you're not being very efficient, and you perhaps need to consider things from a different view, and then you'll realize that progress can be made. And so don't assume that whatever you're involved with, there's only one way of doing it. There are alternative approaches, and at the same time, there is a different view of this. It may be that you feel at the moment you're trying to help. I know, maybe you're helping someone else, but you're not getting the support you need. That might be another way in which this hexagram of oppression is working out. Now, we do have a fourth line, and this means, with the fourth line moving. So because the fourth line is moving, we move to another hexagram. And so the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 29, which is the abysmal. Now, the abysmal is not as bad as it looks. So we don't have to consider the moving lines within the abysmal. I mean, some of the moving lines within the abysmal are pretty difficult, but we don't have to worry about this. We have to just look at the abysmal in its sort of raw form. And so the abysmal is a very watery hexagram. These these two trigrams, you can see you've got the same trigram top and bottom, and those two trigrams are about the abyss, are about water. They're about water, and the abysmal as a hexagram, it does actually promise us success in the end. But the question is, how are we successful? And what the I Ching advises us is to just follow gravity. And it's telling us that we're in a dangerous situation. We could fall into pits very easily. We could fall into the abyss. That certainly could happen. But there's no reason to fall into the abyss. Because, in fact, I think the I Ching talks about repeated danger. It is about danger, but repeated danger. So by saying repeated danger, it means we're dealing with a danger we've seen before. And because we've seen the danger before, that means we know what to do. And so we follow gravity. Water has its own gravity. Water will flow its own way. It will follow the path of gravity. It'll follow the line of least resistance. We've seen this danger before. We go with the flow, and in the end, the situation gets resolved, and the danger passes. And so perhaps this is what the whole thing is all about. Just going back to the previous hexagram 47, oppression. It is a somewhat difficult situation. We know we've got something to do. It's not easy. We've got the resources, but perhaps we're not using these resources as we should. And if we're trying to help people, still we may not be getting the encouragement that we feel we deserve. I mean, we're trying to help, but we're not perhaps being appreciated. So it's all a bit of a struggle, and it's difficult, and in the end it may actually become a little bit dangerous. But we're dealing with dangers but we're not unfamiliar with, and because we're not unfamiliar with them, we can find the path through, and that path through is essentially about following the path of gravity, and not feeling we have to do anything different or weird. Just follow gravity, follow where the water is going, and just with that flow we will eventually reach safety. And talking about safety and danger, I mean, the Sun opposition Uranus is often regarded as quite a dangerous aspect. And for the rest of this video, I will be talking about the Sun opposition Uranus. So let's start by looking at the Sun opposition Uranus as it falls today. So here's Sun opposition Uranus. Takes place on November the 17th, London time, 2:45 a.m. So it will be in November, so late November the 16th if you're in the Americas. And so there is Uranus at 25:14 Taurus, and there is the Sun at 25:14 Scorpio. So with this Sun-Uranus opposition, which happens once a year, I mean, it's not a super unusual aspect. Remember, the Sun-Uranus opposition is also a Sun-Uranus, Earth-Uranus conjunction. They're the same thing from a heliocentric view. So with this Sun opposition Uranus, we might expect the day to be, the weekend, perhaps to be somewhat unstable, though we shouldn't get too hung up on exactitude. So the question is, when is the Sun-Uranus opposition going to manifest? I mean, yeah, sure, Saturday, Sunday is when the aspect is exact, but, if we use a 5-degree orb, it's sort of 5 degrees one way or other, so either one side or the other side. So this Sun-Uranus opposition was starting to come into force, Wednesday of last week, and it will be in force until maybe Thursday of next week. So it's a kind of a window in some respects rather than just a single point of action. But, it is a time when there isn't much stability. And, of course, we've just had a full moon on Friday, which was conjunct Uranus. So, in a way, it's more the same. So if something dramatic happens, is it because of the full moon conjunct Uranus, or is it because Sun opposition is opposition Uranus? I mean, does it really matter? They're all part of the same action. I think I would say that. So I don't think we can expect things to just go to plan. Especially with the Sun Uranus opposition is so close to, well, it's not super close to Algol. I mean, it's over a degree off Algol, actually, the Sun-Uranus opposition. Uranus is, I don't know, I think it's one, let me just look. So at the time of this, at the time of this aspect, looks to me as if Algol's Uranus was 1 degree and 17 minutes from the fixed star Algol. So it's not exactly there, but I think it's still picking up on this, and this just may be a time, when difficult things are happening in the world and perhaps sort of violent events. And of course, we just had the drama of the American elections, but there's been a lot of hyperbole, I suppose, with the American elections. People were expecting a sort of breakdown and all this kind of stuff, and I don't think so far that's hasn't really come to pass. Of course, Trump's cabinet picks have been quite disturbing to some people, but I suppose it was fortunate that Trump won or anyone won, well, whoever won, whether it had been Kamala Harris or Trump. It's fortunate that victory happened so obviously, winning the Electoral College, there being no doubt, having no recounts. It was a clear Trump victory, and I think that has perhaps reduced the capacity for instability, the kind of instability that one might have associated with Sun opposition Uranus. Now, as far as what the Sun opposition Uranus means in terms of the horoscope, it could be about someone who is someone who enjoys instability or who attracts instability, a person who likes to maybe shake things up, is just not happy with the status quo, and they may regard life as being something that needs to be spiced up all the time. Or it can work the other way. I mean, if you've got Sun opposition Uranus, you could regard everything as being very difficult, very dramatic, very traumatic, possibly. Perhaps because you're aware of how quickly things can change. But I think in general we can see Sun opposition Uranus as having a particular view, and someone who has Sun opposition Uranus can be quite original. Now, Sun is a male planet, so you could say that in a female chart that Sun opposition Uranus might be projected. Could be, for example, attracted to a man who is of the nature of Sun and opposition Uranus, attracted to a man who is willful, but who might well be an individual, very individualistic. I suppose on a negative note, it could be attracted to a man who is just difficult and destabilizing. I suppose if you want to get psychological about it, you could say that, a woman who has Sun opposition Uranus, that might say something about her father. Her father is dramatic, inconstant, maybe has a bad temper, and so because of that experience with the father, the woman might be attracted to a man who has similar temperaments and who has a similar temperament. So maybe for her, a Sun opposition Uranus is a definition of a real man. I mean, that's a possibility. I'm not saying that is a reality. So what I want to start off by doing is just by looking at a few people who have Sun opposition Uranus in their charts. And so one person would be Victoria Beckham. formerly of the Spice Girls, who is married to David Beckham, and she has Sun in Aries, opposition Uranus. Now, I would have said that in her case, that Sun opposition Uranus is probably working pretty well. I mean, she's successful. I don't think anything terrible has happened in her life. So Sun opposition Uranus may simply be, here is someone who wants to be an individual, wants to be a star, wants to get noticed. It may be as simple as that. And I suppose Sun opposition Uranus may say something about her husband, David Beckham. He's a Taurus. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that David Beckham is a particularly unstable person. Obviously, he's, as a footballer, you need to have a certain temperament. I mean, I think he got sent off. I forget what the international game was. I mean, I know he got sent off. It might have been during this really important international game for doing something completely irrelevant and completely pointless. But he got sent off, and I think because he got sent off, I think that meant that England had very little chance of winning. Because of course, in a soccer game, once you get sent off, you're down from 11 men to 10 men, and it becomes really, really difficult. I can't remember what the match was, but he's just a footballer. That's what you perhaps expect from a footballer. So she has Sun opposition Uranus, and in her case, I would have said the Sun opposition Uranus probably has worked very well for her, particularly as it's involved with Mars. She's got Sun sextile Mars, Sun opposition Uranus. So that seems to all be very constructive. And Sun sextile Mars, opposition Uranus, I suppose that maybe the men she's attracted to, David Beckham. Again, I'm not convinced that he's an entirely Sun opposition Uranus person. Because he does seem relatively stable. I mean, celebrities, their marriages often don't last very long, but they've been married for decades. So that doesn't seem to be too much of a problem for her. There's a British politician who has got Sun opposition Uranus, and that is Yvette Cooper. I think she's the Home Secretary, and she was married to Ed Balls. Ed Balls, I mean, he's left politics now, but he was a senior politician in the Labour Party. He was a cabinet member, so she was married to, herself a politician, is married to a former politician. She has the Sun. Where's her Sun? Her Sun opposition Uranus. Now her Sun opposition Uranus is dissociate. So Yvette Cooper has the Sun very close to the Aries point, and there's her Uranus very close to the Aries point. So Sun in Pisces, well, we don't know, I don't have a time of birth. I suppose her Sun could be in Aries, but balance of probability, it's in Pisces. So Sun in opposition Uranus. Now, so that Sun opposition Uranus is quite close to the Aries axis, 0 degrees Aries, 0 degrees Aquarius. And so that may intensify the Sun-Uranus opposition. That might be someone who is potentially getting involved in something quite difficult. Now, as far as her husband is concerned, Ed Balls, I mean, obviously, they're still married. I don't think there's any problems with their marriage, so that's not an issue. And I mean, the husband had his own dramas, I suppose, because I think forget which election it was. He lost his seat. So the reason he left politics was because he lost there was a general election and he lost his seat in quite a dramatic way. So I suppose there was drama for her husband, but he's now on TV all the time. He's quite a regular commentator on political matters. And that Sun opposition Uranus. Now, remember, she's Home Secretary. And in the UK, there has been a fair amount of civil strife. For example, there was that stabbing in Southport where someone he wasn't an immigrant, he was born in this country, but he stabbed and killed some young girls. They were having I don't know what they were doing. They were having some Taylor Swift yoga session or something, and he killed them, and that led to sort of uproar and riots. And so, Britain is not a country that is comfortable with itself at all. And I think it's likely that things are going to get worse, and that there's going to be more civil unrest. And the Labour government is not popular. So, in terms of her chart, being Home Secretary is, in other countries they call it something like the Minister of the Interior, and so I remember that film, The Clockwork Orange, about a sort of futuristic Britain, a sort of near future. So you had the Home Secretary, and the Home Secretary was described in the film not as the Home Secretary. He had a different title. He had the Minister of the Interior. Sort of Minister of the Interior has a more draconian feel to it than the Home Secretary. But anyway, Saturn and Neptune are going to go into Aries quite soon. So she has Saturn and Neptune about to hit her Sun-Uranus opposition. So the way I think this Sun-Uranus opposition may work is that she's the Home Secretary. She's in charge of, civil order. If there's a civil disorder, it's down to her. And I think that she's going to be freaked out by the whole thing. That's what I think. When she sees what happens potentially next year when Saturn and Neptune go into Aries, I think it's going to be really difficult for the UK, and she's going to get the brunt of it, being the Home Secretary. So we could see that Sun-Uranus opposition as kind of being projected, but not on her husband, but on the world or the country she's living in. It's like these weird, horrible Sun-Uranus events are happening in her life, and are happening to her country, and she's responsible for it all. So that might be, in her case, how it works. So another person with Sun opposition Uranus was Steve Irwin. And when I've done Steve Irwin's chart, I'm going to just look at Sun-Uranus events, because the first event I'm going to look at is Steve Irwin's death. So Steve Irwin has had, because he was killed by a stingray in 1986, he had Sun opposition Uranus. It's a dissociate Sun opposition Uranus, like Yvette Cooper probably has. So there's his Sun at 2 degrees Pisces, and its opposition Uranus at 28 degrees Leo. But there's still a Sun-Uranus feel to that opposition. It's quite a wide Sun-Uranus opposition. It's not exact, and it's dissociate. But I think that to an extent that showed in his personality. I'm not someone who really followed Steve Irwin. I've seen some of the film, some of the TV stuff about him and Dangerous Animals, but he did seem to be quite a sort of loud, larger-than-life person, and so that might be how the Sun-Uranus opposition is reflected. But it also may indicate that he is attracted to Sun opposition Uranus events. And if you want to use micro aspects with Steve Irwin, you see the Sun-Uranus opposition, it has its midpoint. You see the Sun is about 2 degrees past 0 degrees Virgo. The Sun is just about 2 degrees before 0 degrees Virgo. Sun is 2 degrees after. So the midpoint is about sort of 0 degrees Virgo. So Mars is on a sort of making a micro aspect. Let me just illustrate that micro aspect, just show you what I mean. And I'm using a 30-degree dial. So so if we take to illustrate the midpoint, but I'm sorry about this. See, there's a 30-degree dial, and you see there is his Sun-Uranus opposition. Now, it looks a long way apart. This is because we're a 30-degree dial, and so a 30-degree dial will magnify the differences. And so, this is putting everything. There's his Uranus at 28. What's that? 28. At 28 of the sign. And there's his Sun at 2 degrees of the sign. But then you can see that the midpoint here, so you've got Mars on the Sun-Uranus midpoint. So using the 30-degree dial, so Mars is making a 15-degree aspect to the Sun-Uranus midpoint. A 15-degree is, sextile is 60 degrees, a semi-sextile is 30 degrees, so it's like a semi-sextile. So maybe you can see that in terms of, what he's attracting. So sorry to be a little bit obscure there. And so there's Steve Irwin, and here is Steve Irwin's his death. So at the time of his death, there is a Sun at 11 when he was stung by the stingray on September the 4th, 2006. The Sun was at 11 degrees Virgo. Uranus was at sort of 12 something Pisces. So it just may be that if you have an aspect in your chart, you are sensitive to that aspect in the sky, even if that aspect in the sky doesn't aspect the Sun Uranus in the aspect in your chart. So he was just sensitive to the Sun Uranus cycle, and so he was playing with stingrays. This man with a Sun-Uranus opposition was playing with stingrays, or messing around with taking film of stingrays when there was a Sun opposition Uranus in the sky, and so he was attracting a Sun-Uranus event. And of course that Sun-Uranus event was him being killed by this stingray. So just want to look at a few events now with Sun opposition Uranus. So from a historical point of view, let's some of these events go back quite a long time. So the assassination of Julius Caesar. So Julius Caesar was assassinated. There's been some adjustment here to I have checked it. The Ides of March. So March the 13th. I don't quite know what the adjustment was, but this is the day traditionally where he was assassinated. So Julius Caesar was assassinated with the Sun in Pisces opposition Uranus in Virgo, and you can see that Mercury is almost also involved with it. So Sun opposition Uranus. That Sun opposition Uranus was not exact when Julius Caesar was assassinated. I've no idea when he was assassinated. I shouldn't really be using Placidus Housecast, but I've set this chart for noon. So it emphasizes that Sun opposition Uranus can be a dramatic event. So some huge event. In this case, it is an assassination, and so perhaps that just tells us what we need. I mean, that's something that something can certainly happen when Sun is opposition Uranus, and that changes everything. And obviously, that event had huge implications for the Roman Republic as it transitioned from a republic to an empire. So that's one thing. Another early event, something that happened a long time ago, is the Battle of Grunwald. Now, I don't know very much about this battle. Apparently it was a very important battle, and it was a battle between I believe the Teutonic Knights and Slav armies, where there were German and Slav armies were clashing with each other, and there is the Sun opposition Uranus, just as the Sun was moving into Leo, and the the Slavs defeated the German knights, and it was a really important battle. And I think that we, perhaps from a historical point of view, it may continue. I mean, we're still worrying about what's happening. It may relate to what's going on in Ukraine and perhaps German influence in the region. I don't know, but I don't know much about this battle, so I'm just going to point it out. You probably know more about it than me, but it was certainly a significant event in terms of the history of the late Middle Ages. Now, in terms of British history, we have fireworks in Britain on November the 5th. Remember the 5th of November, gunpowder, treason and plot. So that was when, on November the 5th, 1605, Guy Fawkes and others tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, and it didn't work out. Maybe the gunpowder was damp, but he was caught anyway the evening before, and he was arrested, and they all had a horrible death. I mean, he was kind of fortunate in a way, because he could be hanged, drawn, and quartered. But I think he died when he was hanged, so it didn't get to the drawing and quartered, because he died before he went through the whole thing. But anyway, the gunpowder plot. So the gunpowder plot happened with Sun-Uranus opposition. So, by the way, here is a chart of Guy Fawkes. So Guy Fawkes, he was born on April the 13th, 1570. Now, this program insists, or really encourages me to convert to the Gregorian calendar. So it converts it to April the 23rd, 1570. So here is Guy Fawkes' horoscope. Now, Guy Fawkes does not have a Sun opposition Uranus. He actually has Sun trine Uranus. Now, there's an interesting thing about Guy Fawkes, is that if you convert his date of birth to the Gregorian calendar, it becomes April the 23rd, and he's a Taurus, and Taurus is the sign of the terrorist. I mean, he was a terrorist. I mean, that surely is an attempted terrorist action, trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament, whatever you think of his cause. Now, someone who was more successful than him in terms of blowing up a building was Timothy McVeigh. So remember the Oklahoma bombing. So here is Timothy McVeigh's horoscope, by the way. I mean, I'm not saying Timothy McVeigh has a Sun-Uranus opposition, but when you convert Guy Fawkes' chart to Gregorian, he has the same birthday as Timothy McVeigh. So Timothy McVeigh has his sun in early Taurus. So, that is a reminder that Taurus it very often is the sign of the terrorist. There is something terroristic about Taurans. I think it's because other people talk about stuff, and they talk about things, well, I'd love to do this, I'd love to blow up this and that and whatever. But when a Taurus starts talking about it, Taurans can be serious. Taurans don't mess around. When they say they're going to do something, they do it. They might not talk about it, but they just go and do it. And it's, I suppose, because it's an earth sign, it's fixed. Once they decide on something, it happens. Anyway, as far as the gunpowder plot is concerned, this is the time when the gunpowder plot was revealed. Now, you see it says November the 15th, not November the 5th. Again, that is because this program has made a conversion, has insisted on converting to Gregorian. But in terms of a Julian calendar, it was November the 5th. And you can see that there was a Sun-Uranus opposition. And of course, Guy Fawkes, in his chart, he had a Sun-Uranus trine. So perhaps the idea of violence and blowing things up was, quite familiar to him. He wasn't so uncomfortable with the idea, particularly as he had the Sun in Taurus. So gunpowder plot, yes, there's Sun opposition Uranus. And in terms of another unsuccessful action, very unfortunate that it was an unsuccessful action, was an attempt to kill Adolf Hitler on November the 8th, 1939. So this was a man called Johann Georg Elsa. He planted a bomb in Munich, where it was a meeting where Hitler was going to give a speech, and Hitler narrowly escaped. He left. I think he left early. Maybe it had have gone off, I think it would have killed him. I think 8 people were killed, but this bombing on November the 8th, 1939, I think it happened at 9:20 p.m. in Munich. So there is the Sun opposition Uranus. Now you can see that the Sun is not exactly opposition Uranus, and this is the point I make, that you can't expect Sun-Uranus events to necessarily happen on a dot when the exact moment they happen. You have to consider a certain sense of orbs, and this orb is about 5 degrees. Notice also that Sun is at 15 Scorpio. So perhaps the important point is that the Sun is at 15 Scorpio, very close to the Aries point. In other words, close to the sesquiquadrate, 135 degrees aspect of the Aries point. I suppose I should just show you the chart of the man who planted the bomb. Just would be perhaps unfair on him not to mention his chart. Yeah, there's a chart of Johann Georg Elsa. He was born on January the 4th, 1903. He was executed just before the war ended. I don't know why they kept him alive for so long, but they did. And then just as I think he was in Dachau, just as Dachau was about to be liberated, he was executed in April 1945. So that's his chart. So January 4th, 1903, he has Venus in Capricorn on the midheaven. A lot of stuff in Capricorn. He was very good at sort of making, he was something like a clockmaker or something like that. He was very good at those kind of things, very precise. And with a load of stuff in Capricorn, that was obviously something that he felt that he just had to do. He had to do it. It was his obligation as someone who opposed Nazism, and he doesn't really have a Sun conjunct Uranus. There's his Sun conjunct Uranus. He has it's miles away. It's 20 degrees apart. So that's sort of an opposition on the ninth harmonic, I think. But he doesn't really have a Sun-Uranus aspect. Maybe it's important he has an opposition on the ninth harmonic. That's perhaps something we can look at. But still, I thought I'd just show you his chart. So, other events of a Sun opposition Uranus nature. The bankruptcy of FTX. Remember, Sam Bankman-Fried had this company and heavily involved with cryptocurrency. They were supposed to be buying, using people's funds to buy cryptocurrency, to buy Bitcoin, and they weren't. They were just. So it was a massive case of fraud, and I think Sam Bankman-Fried is now in a sort of federal prison. But when the bankruptcy was announced, we had Sun opposition Uranus, and it was a huge shock. And we can see that Saturn, in fact, Sun opposition Uranus with Saturn on a T-square, a complete shock to the crypto industry. And it devastated the price of Bitcoin. And there is an argument to say that the reason that Bitcoin didn't go up as much as people were expecting in 2021 was because money that was supposed to be spent on buying Bitcoin, in terms of, and that would have led to an increase in its price, was instead being siphoned off. So Uranus, Sun opposition Uranus can be a shock, and with the Saturn involvement, it's a shock that brings everyone down to reality. I think Bitcoin got to $60-something thousand in 2021, then it went to $15,000 or $16,000 in around the time of the FTX bankruptcy. And that was a non-violent event, although it certainly caused a lot of damage to people. The other violent events which took place with the Sun opposition Uranus, you're getting a picture of Sun-Uranus opposition, by the way. It's not nice. From a Russian perspective, the Beslan massacre, So Beslan, there was a school. I think it was Chechen Islamic, if I've got that right. Chechen terrorists. They went into the school, they killed school children. It was an absolute horrific, tragic disaster. And at the time of when they went into the school, and look at the sun again. You see, the sun was not exactly conjunct Uranus, but there was a Sun-Uranus feel to it. So we've got to just be aware of the orb, that build up to the Sun-Uranus. So it can happen before, it can happen after. So like with the Sun conjunct Uranus, we've got on Sunday. We should be thinking about perhaps 4 or 5 days ahead as being that window. And another massacre, which took place in Vietnam, was the My Lai massacre, when American soldiers went. I mean, I've set this, by the way. It says Saigon. I did get the coordinates right. I had to set it for Saigon, and then I had to change the coordinates to get because this village of My Lai was north of Saigon, but I did change the coordinates to make sure the My Lai massacre took place in My Lai. So I didn't set it for Saigon, which was the capital of South Vietnam. So there, the Sun at 25 Pisces, Uranus at 27 Virgo, and of course this was the 60s. We have a Uranus-Pluto opposition, Uranus-Pluto conjunction, and the Sun was almost on the Uranus-Pluto midpoint, but the Sun was certainly opposition Uranus. So perhaps when these American troops, I think William Calley, was it William Calley who led it? I think he recently died, didn't he? These troops, they go into My Lai, and at the time of a Sun opposition Uranus, and I suppose they're trigger happy, they're nervous, and I suppose they dehumanize the Vietnamese civilians. And Sun opposition Uranus, when Sun opposition Uranus, things can happen, things can snap, things can happen unexpectedly, and so that's another example of a massacre happening with Sun opposition Uranus. You want another massacre? Well, we can find one. It's a kind of a small massacre, but it was a massacre nonetheless, was the Idaho murder. So the Idaho murders, so these 4 students were killed in their student house in the University of Idaho, Moscow, Idaho. And the person, Brian Kohberger, who he's the main suspect, he's on trial for his life. And so there we have Sun in Scorpio, opposition Uranus. It's not just Uranus as opposition the Sun, it's also Uranus's opposition Mercury. So there was certainly a Sun-Uranus opposition at the time that this happened. So, and it was, Sun-Uranus is about a surprise, it's about a shock, it's about an event that completely freaks people out, and it certainly was. I mean, it was just this horrific news story. And I suppose it might be a good idea to look at how that related to the chart of the prime suspect. Remember, innocent till proved guilty. I mean, he's on trial for it, and so, but that doesn't mean he's guilty. So here, there was the Sun-Uranus opposition, and that Uranus, interestingly, was opposition. Almost, we don't know exactly what time Brian Kohberger was born, but he had Uranus opposition his Mercury. So the Sun-Uranus opposition kind of in general was hitting some of his Scorpio planets, in particular his Mercury. Of course, you could say Uranus opposition Mercury, if you want to be balanced, you could say Uranus opposition Mercury might be the start of a situation which leads to you being accused of a crime you didn't do. I mean, that's one possibility. Of course, the other possibility is that Uranus opposition his Mercury was having an impact on his mind if he did the crime that he is accused of doing. So that's a chart of Brian Koberger and the murder. So that's about it. I don't think there's any other. Well, there are of course lots of other events if one looks hard enough, but those are a few Sun Uranus events that we can consider. So I think you get the picture with Sun Uranus. Sun Uranus opposition, certainly in terms of events, does not appear to be nice. We've seen examples of massacres. We've got a bankruptcy of the gunpowder plot, sort of a terrorist action. But it's events which surprise people and maybe shock people. And so maybe with this Sun-Uranus opposition over the weekend, perhaps that's something we can, I won't say expect, but perhaps it's something we need to look out for. But maybe that nothing will happen. So anyway, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be extremely grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again very soon.